6:32 now. I would like to welcome everyone to this event. This is our first virtual Fireside Chat. We made an attempt at this in September and had some technical difficulties. So I'm glad that 30 some people decided to give it a try again and see what we have on program for you. I would just like to also add, while we're waiting for more people to come on board, that we have another Fireside Chat scheduled for November 18th. Depending upon how well things go with the Zoom platform, might determine what platform we use. We may try Facebook Live again. I know there's even more equipment that may lend itself well if we can get Richard to play a few things for us, because our guest of honor that evening will be Richard Hoskins, who will be talking about his music and his travel. And like I said, I'm hoping we can entice something in church to actually play a few things for us that evening. We also have something else that I think most of you would have received notification on, at least all the ladies would have, and that is the fact that the Women of St. Chrysostom's are going to be putting together a church cookbook. Many of us have spent a little bit more time cooking during the and I think a lot of people, maybe through their Facebook pages, have had people that have friends of theirs that have wanted to do some recipe swapping, and we thought we'd do it in a more formal basis, encouraging everyone at church to come up with a favorite recipe to submit for this. And we have a list of people who have kind of been spearheading this project, and we're adding more individuals that are willing to be cooking. And I think we're hoping to have this ready sometime in spring. And it looks like we're going to be kind of hunkered down at least through the majority of the spring again. So I think it's still going to be very, very much something that we'll be able to make use of. With that being said, I'd like to turn the program over to Sarah Helfers, who is going to be our moderator with Peggy this evening. And we would like to thank everyone for showing up for this again after our technical difficulties. And we would especially thank Peggy Lo, who graciously agreed to be our first guest and will share with us many experiences that she had both as she began her journey in the Christian faith and what is kind of, I think, helping be what is helping your soul during this time of COVID as well. So Sarah, if you want to take it away and start asking questions, and again, I will repeat that the Lauren Files will be taking care of muting and unmuting. And when we get to the question and answer period, if you want to raise your hand, where am I right here? I'm not even seeing myself, but anyway, raise your hand so it can be seen, and McLaurin will then unmute us for most intents and purposes during the earlier part of the conversation. So take it away, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Helfers. I'm a member of the WASP board, and I'm here to introduce Peggy Lo, who is, I think all of you know, is the assistant priest at St. Chrysostom's. So, and thank you again all for rejoining after our failed attempt a few weeks ago with Facebook Live. Hopefully we'll have better luck today with the Zoom platform. So just again, wave your hands if you have a question, or you can also type a question into using the chat function, which I think that if you scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen, you can see chat, so just type in there. And then I think we'll start off with just asking Peggy to tell us about her journey to the faith and how her experiences as a child and adolescent shaped her journey and how that influences her today. And then we can sort of jump off from there. So take it away, Peggy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. It's just part of life nowadays that we keep trying new things, and sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, and we just keep trying. And so I'm really glad to be back. So I always, when I give sort of my spiritual autobiography, I always apologize a little bit because it's such it feels so convoluted and feels such like I took the long way around to everything. But I think that's sometimes the way our life journey or faith journey looks. To other people, it looks like a straight line, you know, with a clear beginning and end. But as we're living through it, it's like dots all over the place. And it's only after later on that we could sort of see the arc of the story and of how God is leading us through life. So I was born in Taiwan and was raised in a family that wasn't particularly religious, but in Taiwan, sort of in the culture, there's a lot of Confucianism, there's a lot of ancestor reverence, there's a lot of Buddhism. And so I grew up, you know, very young, not knowing stories like Genesis and Adam and Eve, but I knew, you know, stories about karma. We talked a lot about causes and conditions, and also about just sort of that kind of religious faith. And again, my parents weren't particularly Buddhist, but it was sort of all around in the culture, lighting incense and that kind of worship. When we moved to the United States, I was about 7.5. My parents put me in Sunday school they don't remember how long, I don't remember how long. I think they just kind of basically dropped me off and left and then picked me up when it was over. They put me in Sunday school so I could learn how to speak English, to be more immersed in the English language. So that was part of coming to America, and that was the summer before I started 3rd grade. And so they put me in Sunday school, I think, hoping that I would just be immersed in the language and that would help me speak it better. And in that classroom, and again, I don't remember exactly what they taught. I still have the Bible from that Sunday school, but that's where I learned about God, and that's where I learned about prayer. And that's when I felt the sort of reassurance that came with prayer, that there was someone that I was putting my trust in. If I was worried, I knew the thing to do was pray. When I was sort of afraid of the dark, I knew, you know, God was the light. God would make the dark less dark and oppressive. So that was just really for a summer, but that's where I encountered God and learned to pray. And then years later, my parents then put me in Chinese school, because at that point I was really used to speaking English and they didn't want me to forget my Mandarin, forget my Chinese. And so they put me in Chinese school. And this was in middle school, and we were in New Jersey at the time. And there was a youth group there. And so that's how I got involved. I got involved in a youth group. And Auntie would drive me every Friday night to somebody's house. I guess kind of a youth pastor, but that's where all the middle school and high school kids would get together, and we would study the Bible, we would sing songs, and we would talk about God. So I did that for a while, and I went back and looked because, you know, at that point I had no concept of denomination or anything like that. So I've gone back and looked at the website to see what they are, and just says Bergen Chinese Church. And with the understanding that I have now, I know it's more of a fundamentalist church, in that they did say things like your parents are going to hell because they aren't Christian, which I found really hard to square with the idea of a loving and gracious God, but also didn't have the language or understanding that at that point to really like push or ask questions, but that kind of stuck in my mind. And then in high school, my mom got involved in a Buddhist volunteer organization, an international charity foundation, and it was founded by a Buddhist nun. And so I was curious, and my mom had said, you know, there's a chance to go to Taiwan and volunteer. What do you think? You stay at this monastery and you go volunteer at their hospital. And I said, sure, you know, I've never stayed at a monastery before, and that seemed like an interesting experience. And so I did that for a week that summer, and just came away with great admiration for the Dharma master, the Buddhist nun who founded the organization, and this great, that started with 30 housewives, and they began building hospitals and had TV stations. But also the thing that I admired most was just their ethos of volunteerism. And this was before in the US we talked about volunteerism as experiential learning, or at least that's not the way I had heard it in high school. And so I just really admired going around with the senior volunteers and just saw the way that they cared, their compassion for folks that they visited, and just how much they were learning from the people that they visited. So this idea that I thought maybe that I was going to help them, but really they were teaching me so much with their life experience. So I came back with great admiration for them and was open to helping to start a sort of high school group for the organization. And the church folks just wasn't really open to that. They were very discouraging. They just didn't want me to be involved in anything Buddhist, which at that point just felt kind of small-minded to me. Because for me, it was just like it was a great organization and great people. So they were disapproving, that plus the fact that I've never squared, this loving God with the fact that these people were saying that my parents were going to hell. And I was starting to asking questions about institutions and organized religion, and they just weren't open to questions. It just got shut down. And so eventually I left because there was no dialogue. So I left, and then from then on I left during high school, and from then on I was sort of on the agnostic, spiritual but not religious kind of spectrum. And I think I continued believing that there's a God, there's a greater power. I continued praying when I got really stressed out. And I went to church from time to time. I loved finding sunrise Easter services because there's just something really beautiful about that meeting of Easter in the sense of sun rising. So, I never quite lost that sort of, I think, kernel of faith, but wasn't necessarily actually practicing on a regular basis. So fast forward to 2008, and I wrapped up my first career. My first career was working with a nonprofit, a national nonprofit. I was a campus organizer. I did recruitment. I did budgets. I worked on the elections. And at the end of 2008, I knew that the organization wasn't one I was going to stay in for the long term. I would say that, I looked sort of ahead and there was nobody I wanted to be and nothing particular I wanted to do. And so I left. I left the organization. I was in Denver at the time. I left Denver and then moved home to California. And my dad had also retired at that point. So I went home and stayed with my parents. And my dad was sick. He got sick, and we didn't know why. Didn't really know what was happening. And eventually, months later, we took him to the hospital to get something checked, and the doctor said, "We can't let you leave." And the next day after that, he had a triple bypass. And between my dad's illness and also the fact that during that time I was looking for a job, but I had plotted, I guess, this career I thought in terms of being a jack of all trades. I could learn things quickly and pick up things quickly, and I knew a little bit of this and that, but when I was looking for a job, everybody wanted somebody who had been doing something for 4 years or 6 years, and the nonprofit jobs I was looking at that point, everybody wanted you to do development, or, it was just a hard time, because I think I really questioned how I had planned, or I thought planned really thoughtfully. And it didn't feel like that was getting me anywhere. And then my dad got sick, and it just and I helped him through it, helped my family through it. And then I just went through this huge existential crisis about, what was I doing with my life? What was the meaning of life? Where was this all going? I just really I had a lot of questions, and it just was a really dark time in my life. And then somehow, I don't even know where I encountered the book, but I encountered this beautiful book called Cloister Walk by this woman named Kathleen Norris. And it's only much later that I found out that she was Episcopalian. I didn't know that at the time. So it was this great book. She's talking about being an oblate, being a part of sort of a lay member of a Benedictine monastery and the practice of praying the daily offices. And so, and she also just talked about this beautiful way of being Christian that I never thought of. Because again, remember my previous experiences, Sunday school when I was really young, learned about God and learning to pray. And then this youth group that was really more of a fundamentalist teaching, we kind of watched the Left Behind movies, Your Parents Are Going to Hell. And I didn't know that there was this really expansive way of being Christian. And so I just really fell in love with that, and also just intrigued by this idea of the daily office. So I found it online. I started listening to the daily office, bits of it online, and I really loved Compline. And I think that's why today that's still sort of in some ways really close and dear to my heart, because that's sort of Compline brought me back to God, that kind of quiet prayer at the end of the night, end of the day, which also felt like end of the life. So I listened to Compline for a little bit, and then I was like, oh, now I kind of want to like do this with other people, because I was like, oh, this is getting excited about this, and now it's like, oh, now I want to do this with other people, and then I was like, how do you find a church, right? So you Google church, and like all kinds of things come up. And I didn't know anything about denominations, and I was just nervous that I was going to end up in the kind of church that I left. And so I remembered when I was trying to do that 8-9 years ago, when my cousin turned 21, she had her birthday party at this tiki bar in San Francisco. And I remember wherever we parked, and between the parking lot and walking to the bar, I remember seeing this beautiful church. So I said, oh, I wonder what that church is. And so I Googled like tiki bar San Francisco, found it on Google Maps, and said, right, so here's the bar, there's a church, and there's a park. I remember that's what that's like. And then the church was Grace Cathedral, and I went on iTunes and looked for sermons, and they had sermons, and so I started listening to the sermons. And I just remember the first time I listened to it, I was sort of driving and listening to her preach, this woman preach, and it just felt, it felt familiar, and it felt like something, like a conversation I want to be a part of, a conversation I want to be in. And so I listened to sermons for a while. They had recordings of services, so I listened to some Sunday services, some evensong, and eventually I decided I wanted, again, right, worship in person. So it was Epiphany 2010. I was living in the suburbs, so I took the BART into San Francisco, and then took this bus up the hills, these really steep hills, to the top of Nob Hill, and that's where I went to Grace Cathedral. I walked in and got a bulletin, sat down, and it was baptism. So it was Epiphany, and it was baptism Sunday. And I, at that point, was a godmother to a godson, but it was a Catholic baptism, a smaller service, and this was in the middle of it. And much like we do here, folks are invited to go to the back by the font when people are baptized. And I remember just like walking back there, because again, everything's new and I'm curious, and I had no idea what Episcopal was. I think before that, the only time I'd heard the word was in a Sex and the City episode describing Charlotte. So, I mean, that was about as much as I knew. And so I am walking back to the font, just watching these people being baptized. And there's that great question in there that is special, still special to me. It's, will all of you here support these newly baptized persons in their new life in Christ? And everybody says, we will, really loud. And I say those words, it echo through the church, and those words are still rattling around through my bones. And that was, in a way, that was it. And I think it just reflects just how much I love about the sense of the Episcopal Church being a community, and how community and being in community is such an essential part of being the church. So that day I went to coffee hour. There happened to be a Sunday where they talked to newcomers, and so I did that. And so that's sort of where the journey began. And then I started, again, I was in a transition phase. And so I said, you know, God, whatever you put in front of me, I'll say yes to. And so I did, I went through Education for Ministry, which some of you might know, it's a 4-year program for lay people to just get together and talk about church history and theology. And we read through the Old Testament and New Testament. We do the theological reflections together, which was such an amazing way of grounding what we learn in scripture and in church and daily life. Every week we had to talk about implications, like what is the implication of the theological reflection we just did? How does that impact your life? What does that mean for your life? And at the same time I was going through this Christian journey, I was translating Buddhist lectures from Mandarin to English for my job. And so this is the same organization that my mom had volunteered for and that I had gotten involved in. And so, you know, in that time of transition, they're almost like parallel spiritual journeys that just enriched each other so well, because I feel like I was constantly dialoguing, or they were constantly dialoguing through me. And it just, in terms of, it helped me ask questions on both sides, and I think just really pushed me to understand. And when people in that organization would ask, like, have you ever thought about being Buddhist? Like, I mean, you're translating all these Buddhist lectures. Have you thought about it? And for me, I think doing the work also just made me more strong in my Christian faith, because there was always the question of like, why this and not that. So anyway, again, fast forward. I was on Congregation Council, which is a version of the vestry, not quite the same. I was an acolyte. I was a greeter. That was one of my favorite things to do. I just stand in the back of the church and just welcome people in and helping them feel at home. I just really loved doing that, and just always just felt that was one of the best parts, because I got to meet all these people from all different parts of the world, and just encounter them. And I didn't know, you know, what that was, if they were going to come back the next week, or, I mean, maybe they were just visitors, but I just got to learn a little bit about them and their life. And that's also over the years, something that's just so been precious to me, the chance to get to talk to people about their spiritual journeys. You're all hearing mine now, and I would just love to have time to sit down with each one of you and hear yours, and hear what God is calling you to do, and just your journey. But anyway, so eventually somebody asked, I think at the same time I was asking, because I was on Congregation Council, I was just always thinking, like, what can we be doing better? How can we be more welcoming? How can we improve some of our programs? And eventually somebody asked, you know, have you ever thought about being a priest? And I said no, because like I didn't know how people became priests. They just, you know, kind of appeared up at the altar, right? And so it took a year to discern, which is our fancy Episcopal way of saying, you know, decide or make a decision. I took a year to discern whether or not to enter the discernment process. And I talked to folks who both became priests and folks who, you know, went through the process and decided that wasn't the path for them, or the committee that they worked with decided that might not be the right path for them. And I walked away from that year just having such an appreciation of both the clergy order and especially of the lay order. I just remember part of the exercise of discernment is you read the vows that we take at ordination. And I would look at them and say, there's a lot of things that I know lay people are doing and do amazingly. And so I know that, you know, I knew that whatever the discernment process decided, however, again, the community discerned together, that God would lead me to the right place, that I, even if priesthood wasn't what God was calling me to, then God is leading me forward on this journey to figure out what God is calling me to. So, and then, anyway, fast forward, went to Yale for, Berkeley at Yale for seminary, loved it, did my internships in New York. And now I am here. So sorry, I know that's a really long answer to your question, Sarah. I've tried at various points to like cut it short, but then I was like, oh, but all the pieces, right? And I just always think that there were all these pieces throughout my life that I thought didn't have any value. And I just, part of me, the gratitude I have for God and the beauty of where I am now. I feel like God took all these different pieces that I couldn't see how they would fit together, and God redeemed them and said, actually they come together in what you're doing now. And I am just so grateful to God and so grateful to be here. Sarah, I can't hear you. Oh, yeah. No. Oh, you can unmute. The mute symbol is still up by your name. It's okay. If you want to type it into chat, I can bring that up.
Am I live now?
Yeah.
As Sarah's getting this worked out, what, Peggy, then you still had to, once you got through with school, decide like what direction you want to go in, because not everyone would become automatically parish priests. But I remember having a discussion with you, and probably not even all that long ago, and I said, well, like, where do you expect you're going to be? And you said, well, someday I'd like to have a church of my own. So, I mean, but at some point in time, you must have made, when you were in school, the decision that you did want to be a parish priest and want to shepherd a flock versus like some of the academic things that you were doing. And not that you can't do academic things as a parish priest, but still, what made you decide then, as you got further in this journey, that that's the direction you wanted to go in?
Well, I think because I really love people, and I love encountering God's people, and I love this chance that feels really sacred of being invited into people's stories, being invited to hear people's stories. And I think that's just, for me, so much of my priesthood is connecting people to one another, connecting people to God, connecting the church, the community around them. I had to write like an elevator speech, as part of my discernment process. It was like, write why you want to be a priest in 100 words. And so that's what I wrote then, and it's still true now. And I think, again, that sense of community and doing this together, and that we are all part of the body of Christ, and everybody is essential. And I just loved working with people and talking through this with people. And so I think that's really why I feel called to be in a parish.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I was having some user error there.
Okay.
But now I'm back. So sorry, I missed what the last question was, but I know that there was a question that people were wondering about was, how was the job described to you when you interviewed for the assistant priest position, and has it lived up to expectations, and is it consistent with the job description? Yeah,
so Wes and I just had our annual review, so we just had to talk about this. It's pretty, it's amazing. It's pretty accurate. I think we talked about that I would work with outreach, I would work with newcomers, I would work with young professionals and do confirmation, and then have a share in the preaching and teaching and liturgy for services. So I mean, COVID aside, right? I think the split we talked about is pretty much what that lived out to be. I think I am doing a little bit more liturgy just because I love thinking about worship and thinking about how worship speaks to our daily experiences. And so coming up with things or bringing things here like the longest night service before Christmas to sort of respond to, Christmas can be hard for some people, and to make space in the sort of jolliness of the holiday season for that. We've done a couple of healing services. I asked that we do the Holy Saturday service. I don't know that we've always done it here, but it's not the Saturday Easter Vigil, but it's the Saturday noon of like just commemorating, thinking about the time Jesus was between Jesus's death and resurrection, and resting in that, which is something I learned from seminary. So I think, and coming up, Wes and I have talked about it, and I'm still in the process of figuring out how that looks, but just like having some prayers this Saturday before elections and the Wednesday after elections, just again, part of church and the ability of church to respond to things in the world is through ritual, through these sacred rituals we have. And so, so I've gotten in things like liturgy that have a more part in it than I think we originally envisioned, but I really love it. And I'm really enjoying teaching Bible study. Sunday morning has been really great. I love the conversations, and I hope more of you will join on Wednesday nights, these next 2 Wednesday nights, to talk about rest and renewal in the Bible.
Thanks, Peggy. We have a question. Do you go back to the cloister walk often?
I did buy it, and then I don't know that I've read it since then. I've read a couple other books by her. I remember that she also has this book, I think, called Amazing Grace, A to Z, and she goes through these different aspects of the faith. And she has also this book called Acedia, Acedia, where she talks about the sense of, this particular kind of sense of melancholy, which I read in a recent article that somebody was bringing it up in regard to how people might be feeling right now. But I think one of the things that I loved about the book was just the cover. I know we don't judge books by their cover, but that the cover of that was just this kind of tree-lined path and just trees on the side and just this way forward, which I've just been drawn to that in different parts of, places I've been, like in Central Park, the literary mall, I think they call it, just that image of tree-lined streets, just keep walking. And I think so much of this faith is just keep walking, and you don't always know what the end point is, but God does, and we respond by keep walking.
And then on the topic of walking, we know that you're a walker. So what's your favorite part of Chicago to walk around in, and how often do you walk, and how does that influence you?
Yeah, so how often do I walk? I think that the temperature shift has thrown me off a little bit. I'm like trying to learning to adjust to the steep drops in temperature. So I haven't gone walking that much in the last couple of weeks. And also now that, it's getting dark earlier and there's more evening things scheduled on my calendar. So I'm still trying to make that shift. But I've really I've loved walking almost like everywhere. I think the way that I learn a city is by walking it. Even now, sometimes on the bike, I feel like I pass by things too quickly, and I just love, and this was something I really developed in New York and probably earlier too, I love just walking through cities and sometimes getting lost too a little bit. I mean, I definitely love the lakefront. I mean, just being so close to the lake has been such a gift. Although I have trouble just sitting there. Again, this walking thing, right? So the lakefront, Lincoln Park, as I've lived here longer And I feel like the more I walk, the closer things feel. So in the beginning, like Fullerton felt really far away. That part of Lincoln Zoo felt really far away, and now it doesn't feel that far away. I also walked out to the West Loop because there's some great food there, and I love eating. So, and walking there after 3-4 times, that sort of 50-minute walk doesn't feel so long. And then I can also always, like, every time take a slightly different route, go over a different bridge, and just see different murals and stickers and all the different things in stores. So I've just really loved walking around the city of Chicago.
And then besides walking, what do you enjoy doing in your free time?
My free time, I think during COVID, I've watched a lot of TV, probably more than I should, or more than is good for me. But just I also love to read both sort of fiction and sometimes theology books, because it's what feeds me. And I think, it's always good. I mean, I think if anything I've learned in seminary is how much I don't know. And so so I just continue to read. I love to cook, and I'm trying out, so I appreciate this idea of the recipe book, and I'm trying to spend a little bit more time cooking, and maybe try my hand at baking some bread or something. I don't know. We'll see.
And then we have another question from the audience. This is a two-pronged question. First, what was your undergraduate major, and what is the name of the nonprofit for which you worked?
Okay. So my undergraduate major was in psychology, with a focus in social psychology. I was really interested. I went in again, this is like God moving, right? So I went in sort of pre-med thinking I would major in chemical engineering, go to med school, et cetera. I had all planned out. And then I took this class on community organizing and community building, and learned more too about the history of Asian Americans in the United States, and how that's shaped my experience here, whether or not that I realized it. So that was a really important part of sort of my formation in college, taking that class at freshman year and just really changing the course of my major. And that's how I ended up in psychology, because I was curious about the ways that we were shaped by culture, and in my case too, multiple cultures, and the experience of immigration. So the first nonprofit I worked for is called the PIRGs, the Public Interest Research Group. And they're different state organizations. And so the Public Interest Research Groups works on consumer issues, healthcare, democracy, et cetera. And then their environment half works on clean air, clean water, et cetera. And so I worked in Massachusetts for MassPIRG as a campus organizer as my first job, and then did recruitment and budgets, et cetera. And then my second nonprofit that I worked for, I always laugh when people talk about being second career folks in seminary, because I was like, this is my third career. And then my second nonprofit that I worked for, it's called Buddhist Compassion Relief Tzu Foundation. And it's based in Taiwan, and but they have offices all over the world. And so I've gotten to go to places like Australia and South Africa. I even talked with their volunteers in Europe, and have participated in things like free medical clinics in Mexico through their sort of extensive network of offices and chapters.
Thanks, Peggy. I think we have a question from Pat White. Lauren, if you can unmute her. Hang on, we can't hear you yet. Still working on the unmuting.
So Pat, you can unmute yourself.
Up at the top.
Yeah, either like at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to unmute yourself.
So this should be a phone or something with a red line through it, or a microphone with a red line through it.
I'll try to type to Pat and see if we can get her, if we can't get her to unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's what okay. Why don't we can circle back to Pat?
Pat
you have another
should
question?
touch the screen. If she touches the screen, the things come up. Just touch the screen and then you get the little, at the top or the bottom, you get those, the unmute.
My unmute is lower left. If yours is the same, that might help.
Yeah, mine is lower left too, so.
Mine is upper
If
right.
it's an iPad, it's on top.
We do have a couple other questions, Sarah. Maybe you could go to those, and I'm typing to Pat.
Okay, so question is, hi Peggy, I've loved being with you for some of the Sunday school events. I wonder what caused you to align with the Episcopal Church. For me, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, but due to its inclusivity, I stayed and there were no rules, but a focus on faith. That's from Wendy Fox.
Yeah, I think I stayed. I think there's that sense of community. There are also a little bit things that felt familiar. So the sort of the standing and sitting on the physical movements felt a lot like, I mean, did feel a lot like Buddhist worship. There's a lot of sort of standing and bowing, you know, so there's a physical aspect to it as well. I think it's, you know, and it's inclusiveness. Again, the previous experience I had before this was with a more fundamentalist church. And also again and it makes so much more sense later knowing that Kathleen Norris is an Episcopalian, again, the way that she had laid out that experience of praying and the way that she lived her Christianity, her faith, I think was important. And there was just so, I think, you know, part of the staying is the community, right? So I got to know a lot of people there, but also just the ever deepening of faith and always thinking about how faith is connected to life, and what I was doing and my conversations and how it was always moving toward, it always feels like God is both moving me toward more my true self and always trying to understanding who God created me to be and what God created me to do and is calling me to do. And that's a question that I think it's a lifelong question. Just like baptism isn't the end, or confirmation isn't the end of a journey, it's just the beginning. And so is ordination. There is always more things to discern and more things to understand. And and I think I love the way it really geeky, the way our polity works. I appreciate it. Bishop and this way of, you know, priests and lay people working together. Again, it's always community. There is hierarchy, but there is also this strong sense of community, and just this openness and lovingness and this sort of open-armedness. I know that's not a real word, of the Episcopal faith. And there was a statement on the columns in Grace Cathedral that I love that was just similar to what Wes says about the journey of faith. And that statement was just about whoever you are, wherever you are at on your journey of faith, you're here at this moment, and we're so grateful. Something like, we're so grateful and happy that you're here, and, you know, for as long as we walk together, it's, you know, that part of the journey is beautiful, something like that. But just the sense again of just being together and walking together and with a lot of people.
Thanks, Peggy. So do we have a question from Pat now?
Yes, I've got the question from Pat now.
Okay.
What Norris book did she read? Dakota is one of her books about meditation in the Midwest, which I identify with.
So I read Cloister Walk was the first book I read. And then I read Amazing Grace. And then that book, I think it's called Acedia. I don't know. I don't
what are
remember.
books about Peg?
Hmm?
What are those books about? I mean, does she have a theme that runs through all the books?
I think I mean, the really general theme of the books is that she's talking about her faith and how she lives out her faith and what the role of faith plays in her life and in dealing with her relationship, and especially in dealing with her setbacks. I think that was really important. Again, that was this really hard time in my life, and just seeing how her faith, the way that she, and something like the Daily Office, how that shaped her faith and her life, and the way that she was handling some really difficult times. I think I resonated with that and hoped for that.
Is she a layperson?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we got Pat covered. So thanks, Pat, for the question.
Okay. We have another question. I'm from Liz Crampton. It says, hi, Peggy. I know your cathedral in San Francisco was also Episcopalian, but I'm wondering if there were any large differences in the way both churches worship, e.g. incense, etc.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing I missed. I really loved being thurifer. I really loved doing the incense when I was at Grace, and it was funny because the way that we did our process, you went away for a weekend where you got interviewed, and after that they decided you got to move on to be a postulant, which is the first. Being a nominee to postulant, being a postulant means that you can finally go to seminary if you were doing things in order. And so I remember going to that weekend, and somebody asked the question of like, so if you were church, which room in the church would you be? And I said, well, can I be an object? And I talked about being the thurible and being the thurifer, and this just, I'm short, so I love seeing the smoke when I can't see what's going on up there. I love seeing the smoke rise up, especially in the high ceilings of the cathedral. So I think, and also just the reverence that's part of being thurifer, of just paying respect to all the altar party, but also to everybody, and just creating space for God for that pause in the middle of worship. I really loved. I'm trying to think. There's other things that are different. I think I left the cathedral thinking that there's really no reason that any church couldn't do what the cathedral does, to be a place of convening for the neighborhood, to be a place for art. So I really loved when we got to do the panels of trees here up in the Harding room. I hope you all got to see it. A chance to present art to the community and to present the church to the artists. It's that kind of relationship. And the kind of outreach we do, I think it's just, it's really similar. And so, I think I walked away thinking it doesn't have to be that different. I think there's a little bit differences in, yes, no incense, but we didn't have bells at the cathedral either. We also had a beautiful organ and great music. We also wear the same things, basically. So in some ways, there's not a huge difference in terms of that.
Thanks, Peggy.
Sure.
And this is a question that came in a few weeks ago. So you mentioned that ordination is just the beginning. And so you're still somewhat on the early phase of your path as a priest. And so the question is, how do you see yourself going in the future? Do you see yourself as a parish priest with a congregation, or taking another path in the ministry?
Yeah, I think I would really like to be a rector at some point. There's always the question of, I think maybe this is the part of just having gone to a really academic seminary, people asking me, do I want to get my PhD or DMin? And I don't know. I think people are my focus, and it depends on if I have some kind of burning question to ask. So, yeah, so I think, you know, I would be pretty excited to be a rector somewhere down the line.
Thanks. So obviously the past year has been pretty trying from a lot of perspectives.
Mm.
So how do you see yourself, how has the COVID situation impacted both you just in your personal life and also just in your role at the church?
Yeah. So I think first question, in my personal life, I think it just means I don't travel as much as I used to or wanted to. I was looking forward to, I think I had a trip every month just between people's ordinations and other things, or meetings in other parts of the church. So I think I really miss that. And I love museums and movies and musicals and plays. And so some of the things that I've really loved and go to for sort of rest and renewal aren't open right now, and to me right now, or not in the same way. So I think it's been trying to adjust to that and just learning to be, to have as much grace for myself as God has for me, in terms of watching a little bit more TV than normal, or just, you know, sometimes just saying, okay, I just need to stop now and go for a walk, things like that. And then professionally, I think it's been interesting because it's weird to be a priest and not be with the parish, with the members of your parish, and not get to see people on Sundays or visit in the same way that we normally do, or preaching into a camera is just such a weird experience. And at the same time, I think it's opened up different possibilities for different things. This Bible study on Sunday mornings, we get a solid hour in, and in the way that we had our schedule before, from 8 o'clock service to 9 o'clock service to 11 o'clock service, as I learned from doing confirmation last year, that 10 o'clock really, starts at like 10:15 once the service ends and I can get invested and sit down, and then to get ready by 10:50, then so it gets a little bit shortchanged, I felt, working with the confirmands. So I'm really grateful right now to have that like really solid hour to talk to people and to really get into things, talking about the Bible. Or the Wednesday morning sandwich, the sort of St. Chris Kitchen at Home version of that meals ministry has just been such a gift, and getting to know some people better through that. And sometimes it took a couple weeks for me to like recognize people even before, especially with the masks on. But I think that's something that it wasn't needed in the same way, and we wouldn't have thought to do before COVID. So just wanting to appreciate the opportunities for what they are, and just trying to continue to find ways to connect, that isn't the same way that we used to connect, but to hopefully expand what we're doing, and expand the different ways that we can connect. And hopefully even much like, live streaming is something that we'll just keep doing from now on, that there are things that I'm learning now, questions I'm learning to ask now that will serve me well, not just for the rest of however this lasts, but also in my future ministry. I think the practice of looking for opportunities, new opportunities, and to ask new questions.
Thanks. We have another question, this time from Sarah Morganson. How did you incorporate your background with Confucianism and Buddhism into your ministry now? So how do you incorporate?
I don't know that I consciously incorporate it. I think it's working with that Buddhist charity foundation. Part of the job, in addition to translating, is to think about translating not just as into words, but translating words into action, also translating words across culture, translating words across time, because we were translating really ancient text that the Buddhists Dharma Master was preaching on. But just understanding like what's necessary in that kind of translation, I think that shapes the way that I think about preaching. It shapes the way I think about ministry. And so it's kind of interesting because there are some concepts I was exposed to there first, then I found this sort of Christian corollary. I was like, and then that makes so much more sense or feels so real to me. So the idea of for one example would be that in the Dharma Master would talk about the cycle of faith, vows, and action. And that being the cycle of, and you can start at any one of those points, but if you keep moving, if you have the faith to make the vow and the vow that drives you to action, that will strengthen your faith and strengthen or change your vows and shapes your action. And I think in Christianity, we talk about, I love the Benedictine motto of ora et labora, so the prayer and work. And it's always this constant dynamic of prayer and work. That's, again, going back to the daily office, that was the point of it, that you're praying sort of throughout the day, but then you're working between it. And so there's this constant cycle of how your prayer shapes your work and how you see your work and do your work, and your experiences in that then shapes your prayers, and how you read scripture and what you're looking for in scripture, which then shapes your work. So there's this constant cycle that happens in the daily office, between, as you go from service to work to service to work. But I think we also I see that writ large in our weekly dynamic, our weekly rhythm of, you go to church on Sunday and hopefully you're finding something in scripture or in the sermon or in the music or in a conversation you had that feeds you, that helps you work through maybe a problem or something that you were thinking about, or from this last week, or something you're looking for that's coming up, and what you encounter or experience on that Sunday then shapes and maybe changes or reinforces or helps you decide that you are on the right track, or helps you take a slightly different path. But yeah, to have that kind of constant cycle. So I think there are more things like, so there are things like that shape me, rather than like maybe specific Buddhist principles, but just a lot of the ethos. I think that I was doing that as I was learning about being Episcopalian, so it's really shaped each other.
We have another question from Wendy Fox. What are your most joyous times at the church? There are those moments when everything comes together and everything just feels right. There's when just a sense of rightness in your bones, when, it can happen in conversations with people, it can happen in outreach, it can happen in all kinds of different places. I think that one of the most intense, joyous moments I remember is my first Easter vigil, and somebody had described, had told me how beautiful it was going to be in the cathedral. It's going to be all dark and the fire, and like they had said it's beautiful, and Easter vigil is like time with family, whereas like Easter day is kind of like having company, especially in the cathedral, because I think many of the parishioners would come for Easter vigil, and then Sunday would be like the sort of joyful madness of everybody and all the kids and the dresses and everything. But the end of that first Easter vigil, where at the end of the service, we all gather around the altar and we sing Jesus Christ is risen today. And I just remember that very first time looking, standing as part of that circle around the altar, looking around at these faces of these people I've gotten to know and really love, and just say, this must be what, the kingdom of heaven, the communion of saints. It's like just being together with these people of so much love and joy and worshipfulness, and so much joy. And I would say that that's probably like the most intense
moment of joy I've had in the church, and most intense because it's sort of the first time I experienced something like that in church.
Thanks. We've been together here for about an hour, so we should probably wrap up soon, but just one more question.
Can you hear me now?
What do you, yes.
I'm good. I got the thing fixed. I'm so sorry.
Okay, go for
You
it.
gave me all these instructions. I knew all that, but it wasn't working. Anyway, I'm just going to throw out the gauntlet here to Peggy. This book, Acedia and Me, that seemed to make such a difference in her life. I'm a Dakota girl, and that's where my heart is today and always has been. And she is also a Dakota woman. In fact, she lives in South Dakota. And her book, Dakota, is also very famous, and she talks about meditation on the prairie and so forth. I think it might be interesting for you to have a one-time book group, and we could read Acadia and Me and discuss it. After the influence that she had on your journey, I think it would be interesting for all of us to read it, because right now, when so many of us are by ourselves and so forth, I mean, it sounds like that's a book that would really be something wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks, Pat.
More work for you, Peggy.
Well, I think this
We'd
is
like to keep you busy.
well, and I think again, I had to write a lot of things for my ordination process, and I at the end of that short thing of again, that 100-word or so elevator speech I had to write, I said, I know this will be hard work, but it will be a joy to call this my work.
Thanks, Peggy. So just to conclude here, as we're all looking forward to eventually coming out of COVID and getting all back together in person physically again, what are you looking forward to most about us all just being together in person and bringing the community back together physically?
I mean, I think that, I really miss hugs. I just really miss hugs. And so I'm looking forward to doing that safely again. But also just to, I think after this time apart, there will just be such joy and being together again. And I think, and grief too. And I think I'm always mindful of keeping that in mind, that there is a lot of delayed mourning going on right now, and a lot of trauma that we just don't want to deal with right now, because we just want, we're in survival mode, but be mindful of that. But I think I'm hoping that we come back together with these new eyes of seeing new possibilities, not just live streaming Sunday services, but, what other lessons we might learn from these times will we carry over. And just having being in person always sparks, right? The energy of sparking off of each other and ideas and things like that. And so I'm looking forward to what, after the experiencing this together, what then being together the new and sort of beautiful things that might give rise to.
Well, thanks, Peggy. I think this has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for joining and for your patience with our technology issues. I think would obviously rather be together in person, but we're doing the best we can under the circumstances.
Thanks, Sarah. Great job.
Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Peggy.
We hope that everyone enjoys this and shares with their friends, so that when we have Richard Hoskins in November, we get even a better turnout than we had tonight. I certainly enjoyed it. Also, if anyone has a topic that they think would be good, I think we're all going to be hunkered down through the winter months into the spring, so we would love to present other fireside chats if we think that there's an appetite for it. So certainly, I think everybody knows how to contact either through the office or through the website. And I think there's a way to get a cold of WASC there, or many of you have my email address already. Certainly let me know if there's a topic you'd like to see us touch that you think would be relevant to many of our other WASC and parish members. So thank you again for coming, and hope to see you next month. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody, God bless you.
God bless you too.
God bless you too.
Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness.
And they'll ask questions to us.